You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. By going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, you can make this possible. Many of you know him well. He is one of the foremost intellectuals in the country. I did not say black intellectuals, foremost intellectuals. He's an author, a scholar, lecturer. He is a professor. And he simply goes by. The only time you might ever hear him not got something to say is if he's listening to, of course, John Coltrane.
It's true.
Dr. Cornel West. And Curtis Mayfield. Oh, yeah. Dr. Cornel West, how you doing?
How you doing, my brother? Man,
I'm great, sir.
You, brother. You got longevity, though, brother. You rolling. You are, in Curtis's language, brother. You've been keep on pushing. And I respect you, though, brother. Love and respect. I love that A5A, too, though, brother, in the name of Donny Hathaway and Duke Ellington and Martin Luther King Jr. and John Hope Franklin and a whole host of others, including Roland Sebastian Martin himself. And Cornel.
And Cornel. And earlier we had Reverend Dr. William Barber. So,
Lord. And we want to salute Brother BB, too, man.
Yes, sir. That's an amazing song.
He represents a grand exemplar of our great tradition, man, the black musical tradition, the greatest modern tradition in the modern world, dealing with catastrophe and responding with creativity and compassion. So we salute BB and CC. Their whole family is part of the nobility of the artists that keep us real and keep us accountable, my brother. Speaking
of that, I asked this to Erica Alexander, and I said this, and I've been saying it. In my 51 and a half years, I have never seen the kind of movement that we have seen in this country, actually around the world, since George Floyd was murdered 6 weeks ago. When you see King Leopold statues coming down in Belgium, when you see them targeting roads in England, when you see in New Zealand taking down colonizer statues as well, when you see corporations having to respond to rebellions on the inside from black employees and young white allies as well, when you see police departments, I mean, George Floyd's murder literally has unleashed something that this we have not seen in more than 50 years.
You are absolutely right, though, brother. And Brother Floyd Jr., though, man, his impact on the world. We were comparing him with Emmett Till in 1955, but now it is so global and international. It's amazing. It's amazing what happens when the manifestation of a spirit, of a hatred, of an injustice, in this case of white supremacy, and the fact that it's a combination. You got a neo-fascist gangster in the White House, lying, tied to crimes. You've got pandemic in place, so people do have extra time to think about some things rather than just get caught in their routine. And then you got public lynching. And then the hunger and the thirst for something real. All that coming together, and my brother, this marvelous manifestation of militancy on the streets in the name of a bearing witness in the face of white supremacy is a beautiful thing, though, man. It was unprecedented. Nobody could have predicted this. Nobody.
Right. Well, and I think I was having a conversation last night, and someone said that this thing just happened. I said, no, this did not just happen. I said this was a buildup. This was a constant buildup. I said you can go back to Eric Garner. You can go back to those deaths, John Crawford III, Rekia Border, Yana Jones. You can go back. You can Breonna Taylor, Mark Arbery. You can go back to Trayvon Martin. You can go back to Jenna Six. I said you can just keep going back. I said, and then what you had was I said for the 12-year-old kid. White kid, when Obama announced in February 2007, that white kid is now 25. And so you have all of those things. And I said, we can't overlook that for them, their first president was a black guy. And then the second time, 8 years, then a woman is a leading candidate. So the world that they have seen is totally different from previous generations. And it has unleashed these forces that, frankly, America and the world was not prepared for.
That's exactly right. The one thing I would add, though, brother, and you tell me what you think about this, is the intense Afro-Americanizing of young people of whatever color in hip-hop culture.
Yes.
So from Tupac and Biggie all the way through Missy, all the way up to Jay-Z and Kanye. We know how confused our brother Kanye is, but I still love the brother, appreciate his genius. But the impact of the hip-hop artists in shaping the sensibilities of a lot of those young activists who are out there, you see, because they've heard from NWA. They've heard from the various artists about police brutality. Now they get a chance to see the public lynching before their very eyes. And so in that regard, the role of the arts becomes very important in terms of shaping the sensibilities of these hundreds of thousands of folk, but disproportionately young folk who hit the streets. Does that make sense, my brother?
No, it makes total sense because, again, but that's a part of these forces and how they're moving and how they're converging.
Yes.
One of the things that, and Reverend Barber and I were talking about this here, and this probably was around the third week after the death of Floyd, and people kept talking about riots, they kept talking about looting, they kept talking about rebellion. Many of us were using the phrases reckoning. Then I went to my library, and then I grabbed a series of books. And I see your books behind you. And one of the first one, I was trying to really think about this thing in a much broader and bigger way.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought about was Du Bois' Black Reconstruction. Then I pulled out Eric Foner's book, Reconstruction: America's Unfinished Revolution.
Oh, yes.
Then
and those two go together, hand in
Yeah.
hand. 1935, 1987.
Then I pulled out Manning Marable's The Second Reconstruction and Beyond in Black America.
Oh,
And,
yes.
and then Dr. Barber's book, The Third Reconstruction, Moral Mondays. I have been saying that this is the third Reconstruction, that we should not look at this as sort of this short-term thing. We should look at this thing as the first Reconstruction was 12 years. The second Reconstruction, Marable has it 45 to 2006. I really have it from 54 to 68. I said, which lasted 14 years. We have to be thinking in terms of the third Reconstruction, because Reconstruction means literally reconstruct the nation, reconstruct the system, reconstruct the paradigm, not make small fixes. Your thoughts?
Oh, you're absolutely right. And I would turn to Du Bois's great text of 1921 called The Gifts of Black Folk. A lot of folk know the 1903 book, The Souls of Black Folk, but the gifts of Black folk. He says, what are the gifts? Well, two of the major gifts is the reconstruction of freedom, the reconstruction of democracy. But the big difference here, though, brother, is that this third Reconstruction that you talked about, that Brother Barber talks about, and Brother Eddie Glaude talks about in the Third American Founding in his recent book on James Baldwin, Begin Anew, is that we're this moment of the decay and decline of the American empire, so that the impact of America around the world is lessening, not just its reputation, but its inability to present itself as something that it is not, which is this beacon of liberty. I mean, here's, July 4th, right?
Right.
Frederick Douglass, celebrations of shame, national greatness, swelling vanity, boast of liberty, unholy license. America reigns without rival when it comes to revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy. That's Brother Frederick Douglass, July 5th, 1852. Well, now the chickens have come home to roost, though, brother. America has been revealed to be a place that cannot deliver basic goods and services to its own people. 40% of Americans living near or in poverty. It cannot protect rights and liberties when it comes to those dissenting voices that are being pushed to the side too often. And it cannot deliver purpose and meaning, because its commodified culture is so spiritually empty and vacuous, and it's all about getting over and manipulation and domination, rather than learning how to care and nurture for others and cultivate intimacy and love, which is what makes life worth living. That's why you got the drug overdoses taking place. That's what you got, the unbelievable sense of meaninglessness, what I call nihilism, taking place, so that the culture of an empire, as well as its nation state, with all of its militarism around the world, AFRICOM in Africa expanding and so forth, dropping drones on innocent people, and then the greed, my brother, the greed beginning on Wall Street and spilling over, which is out of control. That's the difference between the second Reconstruction and the third one, because the second Reconstruction, America was just beginning to expand itself beyond the continental bounds, given its internal imperial expansion, looking for Guam, Puerto Rico, Philippines, and so forth. Now America is on the decline and decay, and you begin to see what Malcolm was talking about. You're going to reap what you sow. Sooner or later, those chickens going to come home to roost. And then the question becomes, how do we, in the belly of the beast, still love truth, beauty, goodness, love Black people enough to recognize that the reconstruction and the reawakening is the only option, or America goes under?
I was on this call last night, and this guy kept saying, well, just can we put a number on it? And he said, is it reparations? I said, no. I said, no, it's not. He says, well, can we put a number on it? I said, no. I said, it's an unknown number. And he was like, well, I don't understand. I said, see, here's the problem with this conversation. I said, how America always works is it's so like you take your car in and you don't really want to hear what the mechanic, just tell me how much it's going to cost.
It's just money.
So they give you the number and you're like, okay, fine, fix it. I don't want to hear nothing else. what I explained to them is, I said, you can't put a number on this. And I know Bob Johnson came out, said 14 trillion, and I've seen other reports. I said, the reason I said I'm not going to put a number on it, the reason I'm not going to call it reparations, is because I said, this thing is so deep, it is so pervasive, it is so systemic, that if I put 14 trillion on it, once I get in, I may realize it's 40 trillion.
Yeah, 20, I was thinking 28, 45, yeah.
I said, so what you want me to do, you want me to limit, so when we hit that limit, well, you said it was 14, hey, here's 14. I said, no. I said, because you got to deal with education, you got to deal with housing, you got to deal with health. I started going through all these different categories, and I said, it's not that simple, and I think that's the problem with America. The impatience of America is like, look, just how much is it going to cost for y'all to go away? And I'm saying it ain't that simple to simply say how much is it going to cost, because, again, I'm sitting here with where do we go from here, chaos or community.
Ooh, yeah.
King said, America, you ain't ready to write that big check. And he didn't put a number. He just called it that big check.
No, that's real, though, brother. I mean, part of it is people always want to reduce these kinds of issues of such crimes against humanity to just monetary matters, because America is a business culture. It's a market-driven culture. It's a money-obsessed culture. But you are absolutely right to resist it. But I think what you and I would agree is that there's got to be some kind of repair. So some form of reparations is required. And so we're going to have a dialogue. And the dialogue's got to be a robust dialogue. We got to bring in William Gardy. You know what I mean? You got to bring in all the different voices. You got to bring in Sister Yvette and Tone and all the other voices that's been talking about reparations. But at the same time, you see, I want to talk about redistribution of wealth in addition to reparations.
Right.
I mean?
And that's what I'm saying.
That's not being a citizen. That's not just about being a descendant of slavery, Jim Crow, Jane Crow. That's just as an American citizen, they have a right to Medicare. That's what Brother Bernie's absolutely right. They got a right to a job with a living wage. They got a right to decent housing, and they got a right to quality education so they can get their minds and souls together to be fortitude, to love and respect ourselves enough to be willing to fight.
And that piece right there, again, because what it does is, and this is how I've laid it out. I said, we black folks, we've never had full citizenship.
That's true.
I said we've had it technically. The fact that yesterday I did a whole hour special today on the Crown Act. Today is the first anniversary of the Crown Act. I said, if you want to understand why we're not at full citizenship, the fact that a law had to be passed that says you cannot discriminate on somebody's hair tells me there's no full citizenship. I said, if we had full citizenship, there would be no need for the Crown Act.
That's right.
There would be no need for us trying to get McConnell to vote on the bill the House passed that restores what the Supreme Court took out of the Voting Rights Act, declared unconstitutional. I said, I said to this group of largely white folks, I said, that's what y'all don't understand. I said, we have always had to go back and legislate our rights when you got it just because it's you.
That's exactly right. And that's what Malcolm was trying to tell us in the 60s, that you cannot be a full-fledged citizen if you have to undergo constitutional revision with an amendment to make you citizen, and then it's on paper but never enforced, it's never executed on the ground. And when you try to execute it on the ground, you get white backlash so that it can never be true in practice, even when it's on paper. We break our necks to get it on paper.
Right.
Even when you get it on paper, it's not enforced, you see. So that, you know, it raises deep issues in terms of whether the country has the capacity to treat the masses of black people with respect and dignity. That's Garvey's question. Garvey used to say what? As long as black people in the United States, the masses of black people will live lives of ruin and destruction. Now, I have great love for Marcus Garvey. I have great love for the black nationalist tradition. I'm not a Garveyite. I'm not a black nationalist. He's my brother. They are my brothers and sisters and so forth. But that question, the Garvey question, remains unanswered because the masses of black men, I'm not talking about the exceptional Negroes. I'm not talking about the black middle class. I'm not talking about those who have been incorporated and in some sense integrated. And I love them too, but I'm going to bring critique to bear on them if they don't put black poor and working people at the center of their view. And of course, for me, the Christian, focusing on the least of these, always the most weak, the most vulnerable. And I know you heard the same thing from Brother Barber.
The thing that, as I look at right now, and first of all, these brothers and sisters with Until Freedom and other organizations, New York Justice League, they are strategizing, they're planning, and they're operating. But one of the things that and there are numerous groups out there. There are groups that are national, there are groups that are regional, that are local. Of course, you have your traditional groups, the NAACP and the Urban League, but then you have a number of other different groups. What has been, it's not necessarily troubling me, but as I've been sort of trying to, again, think about this in terms of reconstruction terms.
Right.
The thing that what I keep saying is, I think, Doc, that the ask is too small. And as I was sitting here, so this was one of the things that, so MLK wrote in Where Do We Go From Here? He says, one of the main questions that the Negro must confront in his pursuit of freedom is that of effectiveness. What is the most effective way to achieve the desired goal? If a method is not effective, no matter how much steam it releases, it is an expression of weakness, not of strength. And so I think right now, the ask is too small. I have been on calls with, I'm vice president digital for National Association of Black Journalists. And we were on a call and someone was talking and they were talking about, well, this corporation, they were asking for 100,000. I said, I'm sorry. I said, that's too small. They said, Roland, what are you talking about? I said, 100 million each. That equals $1 billion. Folks, they were like, what? I said, yes, $1 billion. I said, y'all, this ain't a small ask. I think what we're seeing, people are excited. Well, Adidas is giving 100 million and Michael Jordan and Comcast is giving 100 million and Apple 100 million. And I'm sitting there going, 100 million a year? I think we got to be challenging our folks to say that the ask is too small.
That's true though, brother. That's true. Because see, what has happened now is, when you have brothers and sisters of all colors in the streets and the status quo is running scared, that they throw money at the problem. But see, philanthropy is not justice. Charity, not justice.
And it's not investment.
And it's not investment. And it's not consistent and recurrent. I like your notion of annual, yearly, a pattern of support, you see. But we got to make sure that vast amount of that money though just doesn't end up in black professional pockets.
Right.
Somehow it's got to get to our precious brothers and sisters in the hood, dealing with poverty, dealing with inadequate housing, dealing with massive unemployment and underemployment, because it's so easy that the money remains circulated within the professional class, be it black, white, or whatever. And so you end up with a class hierarchy that's just more colorful at the top, but the class hierarchy still got too many folks suffering, disproportionately black, disproportionately brown, disproportionately indigenous peoples.
Which still requires organization, which still requires structure.
And courageous leadership. Leadership.
Right, and that's the piece where what I keep saying to folk, it's real easy to say. It's real easy. I go back to the May Day marches we had. You had Latinos/Hispanics marching all over the country. 1 million in LA, 1 million in New York, in Chicago, in Houston, all over the place. But people say, well, why wasn't it effective? It wasn't effective because you had boots on the ground, but you did not have organized infrastructure who could then take those demands, place it within a public policy narrative, and then drive it through. See, we keep talking about King and Fannie Lou Hamer and all those folk, but you can't ignore Clarence Mitchell. If there's no Clarence Mitchell walking the halls of the Senate and the House pushing folk on the bills, so he was doing that work, and so that's the other piece that And again, I look at these groups, and what I keep asking the groups is, okay, this is what you're doing, but what's your plan? I see but what's the plan? And you're doing, how's it reaching people? Where is it going? Where are resources going? And I think we got to keep doing is challenging black folks, black organizations right now saying, oh, okay, so the corporations are giving you NAACP this money and the Urban this money. Okay, but we want to see the plan.
Yes.
What you're going to do with the resources that they are given.
There you go. We want accountability of you when the money comes in terms of your plan and how it will be executed. Now, I do want to say this about that Mayday, because I was there marching with my Latino brothers and sisters. You remember at that particular moment, DACA was off the chart.
Yeah.
We put pressure on Brother Barack Obama. Tremendous pressure for him to push through on that executive order. We had almost 1 million folk in Washington, D.C. And I give Mark Mario credit because he was there. It was wasn't that many black folk there.
Very true.
Brother Tavis was there. But I mean, you were covering it. But I mean, you everywhere.
Right.
You know what I mean? You everywhere. That's the kind of Houston, Texas brother you are. You everywhere.
That's right.
But the thing is that you have to be able to have an inside-outside strategy. See, you got the Sister Barbara Lee's on the inside. You got Bernie Sanders on the inside. I'm talking about the folk who really gonna fight. Now, I'm not talking about folk who just posing and posturing like peacocks. I'm talking about they're gonna really come through. But you have to have insiders who are heeding the call of folk on the street, so that pressure is very, very real.
We one of the things that a few weeks ago, and we had a great conversation. You had some prison stuff that you were doing. You had a podcast, and we had this great conversation with Brothers of Alpha.
Oh yeah, I wanted to be there, but my brothers from Broadway were
yes, sir. It's all good. We had an unbelievable conversation, and the thing that and the reason I have been pushing them. And I've been talking about this here because what keeps getting stuck in my head is something that King said. Because again, I keep getting stuck on organization and infrastructure because you can't mobilize people unless you have something you're mobilizing them into.
That's right.
And I want to get your perspective on this because I have been preaching and yelling this for more than a decade now. When King said, there are already structured forces in the Negro community that can serve as the basis for building a powerful united front. The Negro Church, the Negro Press, the Negro fraternities and sororities, and Negro professional associations. But I love this line. We must admit that these forces have never given their full resources to the cause of Negro liberation. He said, too many Negro newspapers have veered away from their traditional role as protest organs agitating for social change and have turned to the sensational and the conservative in place of the substantive and the militant. Too many Negro social and professional groups have degenerated into snobbishness and a preoccupation with frivolities and trivial activity. The reason that's important because what I have argued and what I said to the Brothers of Alpha and all the Divine Nine, I said, we have this massive infrastructure. We're international, national, regional, state, grad chapter, local chapter, and we have programs that go all the way down to pre-K. We're self-funded. Corporations don't fund us. I said, yet our focus for the most part is on internal. And I've argued that if there's a city council, a school board, a county commission, or a state legislature, if they see men in black and gold and don't automatically shudder, that means we have not been showing up, flexing our muscle.
Ooh, that's a powerful, powerful way of putting it, my brother. That's very real. And we should be very candid about what Brother Martin was hitting here. He was talking about the worst of the black bourgeoisie, the worst of the black middle class, or what James Weldon Johnson and Rosamond in the Negro National Anthem said, we're falling in love with the felicities of the world, drunk with the wine of the world. See, which is the superficial stuff, status, position, rather than service and sacrifice. Now, the best of the black bourgeoisie, Martin himself, Duke Ellington himself. We can go on and on. Those middle class folk that said every black person, and I would say as a Christian, everybody, but every black person has exactly the same status.
Right.
So if your child is Jack and Jill, you ought to be as concerned about brothers and sisters in the hood as Jack and Jill brothers and sisters. See, that's what Martin was getting at. So when you look at the churches, the mosques, fraternities, sororities, they've got wonderful folk in them, but they also have tendencies, and you and I have seen it over the years, to deal with superficial things.
Right.
And in a moment of crisis, and we always live in every moment of crisis, be black in America, every moment of our lives in certain such moment of crisis, is how do we tease out our courage and our vision to make sure that we can create some kind of organization. Garvey used to say what? Disorganization is the major obstacle for black freedom. Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Nkrumah would say it over and over again. Organize, organize, organize.
Right.
And a variety of different kind of organizations. See, I don't think we'll ever have one overarching organization.
No.
I mean, people have come down on me recently. I was been defending my dear brother, Mr. Louis Farrakhan, in terms of his right to speak. They canceled him on Fox. I was on Fox News. I said, no, he got a right to speak. Well, you disagree with him. Well, he's my brother. We overlap on some things. We both hate white supremacy. We argue on other things, you see. But we have to be willing to take a risk. If somebody messing with you, you not perfect, I'm not perfect. But you are my brother. And if you know over the years, I've got to step forward. Why? Not because any of us exemplify purity, but because there's a slice in the black community of people who are willing to step out, be courageous, cut against the grain. And when they do that, even when you disagree with them, you have to defend their right to be, to speak, and so forth. And so that requires just a matter of consistency, though, brother. And consistency is a rare thing these days. Even given this historical moment that we're in, it's hard to find consistent folk. That's why I started off talking about your longevity, man. The up, the down, Roland is still there. That's
right. You ain't gonna do
it, man.
Right. And you're absolutely right. On that one is very. So I want you to explain for our folks. We discussed this the other day, that I don't think white America has really any understanding that with the relationship between Nation of Islam and African Americans. And some people got mad at ICE. Some people got mad at Ice Cube when CNN's Jake Tapper was criticizing Farrakhan, and Ice Cube tweeted, "Watch your mouth."
Right. Right.
What do you say to the white folks and some black folks who say, "Wait a minute, how can you be black and criticize a Richard Spencer, criticize some? So they would throw in a David Duke and other. How can you criticize them, but then you'll say that Farrakhan should speak?" How do you respond to that?
Well, one is I say first you got to quit lying about my brother, Minister Louis Farrakhan. When he said Hitler was wickedly great, he was the greatest among the wicked ones. And it was an indictment of a Holocaust. It was a critique of Hitler's treatment of Jews. So what has happened is you get this shoddy journalism where they say, Ms. Louis Farrakhan said Hitler's a great man. That's a lie. He said he's wickedly great. Well, he said something about Judaism. He said Judaism can be used as a gutter religion. Well, I'm a Christian. You know that. Can Christianity be used as a gutter religion? Hell yes. Ku Klux Klan. Constantine using Christianity to defend the empire. Christianity used against women, against gay brothers and lesbian sisters. So first you got to tell the truth about Minister Louis Farrakhan. Now, does Minister Louis Farrakhan speak only the truth? No. He got to be accountable like everybody else.
And in fact, you challenge him aggressively on his attacks on people of the Jewish faith.
Absolutely. And when we met for 9 hours, when we first met, and all I told him was, I said, there's no such thing as the Jews. You got reactionary Jews, you got right-wing Jews, you got centrist Jews, you got progressive Jews, you got revolutionary Jews, just like there's no such thing as the blacks. Nobody speaks for me or speaks for you. We got Clarence Thomas on the one hand, we got William Barber, we got Michelle Alexander and Angela Davis on the other. And he received that. He said, Brother West, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. So part of the problem is that when you have a corporate media that is so intent on lying on a brother, first you got to make sure you get the truth. Then when you get the truth and you still have disagreements, then you have a serious conversation and dialogue. But I think one can never deny the level and the breadth of the longevity of Minister Louis Farrakhan's hatred of white supremacy. That's just a fact. His impact on everyday black people. That is just a fact. That does not mean in any way that we agree with everything. I mean, of course, as he's a Muslim and I'm a Christian, we got theological disagreements, just like Malcolm and myself. But at the same time, I'm going to be very honest and always try to be candid and speak whatever truths that flow out of my soul and deal with consequences. And what has happened is it's been almost taboo to have anything to do with Mr. Louis Farrakhan because of the corporate media. You see, I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong.
Speaking of that, I'm looking at various comments here on our YouTube channel, on other channels, and there've been a number of people who said, "I hear you, Dr. West, but I can't get over what you did to Obama."
Mm.
And he's been gone now for 3 years out of the presidency. And you and I had a previous conversation about that, where we had a very honest dialogue where I stated where I thought you made missteps.
Absolutely.
As you reflect on that, as you reflect on how a lot of black folks who really loved you and respected you, they turned away. How have you thought about that and played that through your mind in the last 3 years since he left the White House?
Well, I mean, one, as you know, for me to do over 65 events for Brother Barack Obama for free from Ohio to Ohio in 2008, and then support him again in 2012, I would say, well, I am going to speak the truths inside of my soul in regard to any head of the American empire. That my critique of the system is different than a critique of just the person. I've never been obsessed with just the individuals. I've always been obsessed with the injustice in the system as a whole. So when they say to me, "Oh, Brother West, you were hating on Obama," no, I hated his relation to Wall Street when he bailed out Wall Street and didn't bail out the homeowners, and 58% of the black middle class lost their homes. Oh, you hate Obama. No, I hated him dropping drones in Libya, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Afghanistan. 563 of them, over 4,000 people killed, many innocent ones. I'm a Christian. Every baby got the same value. I don't care what color they are. So I got to bear witness to that truth. Now, the symbolic significance of Obama, I never denied. He is historically unprecedented. He's brilliant. He's poised. He's subtle. He got a magnificent family. He and Sister Michelle have done a wonderful, wonderful job with their two blessed daughters. But that doesn't mean I don't critique the system. He was head of the U.S. empire, tied to Wall Street, tied to drones. So just like Martin had to come out with a critique of Vietnam, just like Martin had to come out with a critique of wealth inequality and Wall Street greed, why is it that the Wall Street criminals get away, but those who commit crimes in the hood go straight to jail? I had to raise my voice. And I went at Obama tough because my expectations were high. Therefore, my disappointment was deep. And so in that sense, I would say to many of the young brothers and sisters, whoever they are, and they don't have to still agree with me or whatever, but as they look back, do they not admit that when it came to Obama speaking to issue, even of white supremacy? You remember when the black leaders came out of the White House in March of 2009 talking about, well, there's no such thing as the black agenda anymore because Obama said he's not president of black people. He's only president of America. And therefore,
I remember, and I disagree vehemently. I disagree vehemently.
And I said explicitly right there in Ebony magazine, that makes me want to vomit. We ain't been a black people for all these years and get a black president, and all of a sudden we don't have a black agenda anymore. No, something is wrong. That's a Keith Sweat moment. Something just ain't right, brother. something just ain't right. Now, I had to raise my voice and say that. But it's true that it was the some of the language that I use upset some folk. But when it comes to me speaking what's inside of my soul, brother, I'm going to be like Al Green. I just got to get it out no matter what it sounds like. And I'm sorry sometimes I want to be accountable. But in the end, it ain't about hating Obama. It's about hating deeds. See, I believe in hating the sin and trying to always love the sinner. And I've never talked about him personally in terms of his character. I've talked about his conformity, his complacency, and sometimes his cowardliness. And people don't want to hear that, but everybody got cowardliness. I got it. I know you probably got a little bit. He got it too. We need to call it out.
What is your present day relationship with Tavis Smiley? I don't have one. I've never had a relationship with Tavis. We would speak, I would see him, but we never had a relationship. He lost his show. He lost the lawsuit. He no longer does his State of Black America events. There are a lot, basically before this whole phrase cancel culture came out, there were a lot of folks who said they canceled Tavis, and they were linking the two of you because of your criticism of Obama. Is there a place for Tavis Smiley in Black America, and should there be some type of reconciliation? Because when you bring up his name to a lot of Black folks, they are still very angry again with you and him, but especially him.
Well, I mean, when you turn back to Brother Tavis's powerful text, accountability, if they actually read that text, they'll see that he turned out to be more right. Because all he was calling for, and I was calling for, was accountability. When he and I went on the poverty tour, because Brother Barack Obama would not mention the word poverty, he only talked about the middle class. Who's talking about poverty now? Almost everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So that people have to give Brother Tavis credit in that regard. And one, Tavis will always be my brother. I always have a deep love for Brother Tavis. We certainly are not as close as we were before for a variety of different reasons. But that doesn't mean I don't love my brother. And his contribution from Black Covenant and a whole host of other things are undeniable. His impact, undeniable. Tom Joyner Show, undeniable. So the idea of just pushing people away so quickly, I think it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. And all of us in life go up, and all of us in life go down, and it's the bounce back. And he's bouncing back, and it's a beautiful thing.
We are seeing, I also think with George Floyd, I hope to see a massive resurgence, as Dr. King said in Where Do We Go From Here, the militancy of Black media. The reason I created my own platform was because I said, to be perfectly honest, I wasn't interested in asking a white producer, can I go cover Black people, and them saying no. Right. I said we could not have gotten to where we are now unless we had a Black-owned media that speaks to us. I was very critical of the fact that the first funeral service for George Floyd, all of the networks were carrying it. TV One, no. Their sister network, Clio TV, no. BET, no. BET Her, no. Revolt, no. OWN, no. Bounce, no. Aspire, no. Afro, no. And I said, what the hell? How can you have this moment where the nation is transfixed and you turn to these other networks and they were showing the funeral of George Floyd, and the Black networks were showing damn sitcoms?
Wow. It's a sad thing, brother.
Now the second funeral, BET and Revolt carried it, but I believe that part of the problem that we have is that we have too many folk in Black media who are doing exactly what King said when he said they have turned to the sensational and the conservative in place of the substantive and the militant, and we are seeing entertainment, we are seeing gossip, we're seeing reality shows, and we are not seeing people who are modern day Robert Abbotts, modern day A.I. Scotts, modern day Claude Barnett, so Ida B. Wells Barnett. And I'm sorry, in this moment, Black networks and Black media cannot be filled with a bunch of damn gossip and entertainment.
You are absolutely right, brother. And that's why we got to go back to the best of our history. You see, because to be a black journalist is to be part of a black middle class that oftentimes could be so obsessed with the white normative gaze or white persons and powers being the point of reference for you. You have to define yourself in relation to the greatness inside of your own tradition or any forms of greatness in other traditions. So that what is the standard that William Monroe Trotter set? You read
Right.
Cary Greenidge's powerful text. What's the standard Ida B. Wells set? What's the standard T. Thomas Fortune set? Or the names that you talk about? And the
Martin
ways in which
Delaney.
you are Martin Delaney or Frederick Douglass are part of that same tradition. And what did they do? They pierced through the superficiality. And see, sometimes that means, oh, Brother Roland, you got to be willing to give up popularity for integrity.
Yeah.
Because you ain't loving black people for them to love you back. You loving black people because they're worthy of being loved, and you trying to bear witness to get them to see things they not seeing and do things they not doing. Vision and courage. That's precisely the history of the best of black journalism. And Malcolm himself, founding Muhammad Speaks, right? He's a journalist too, in that regard. And he continued to grow, as we know. What did he say? Whoever's for truth, I'm for it. Who's ever fighting for justice, I'm with you. But I'm beginning on the chocolate side of town. He didn't add the Parliament Funkadelic language. But he said, I'm starting on the chocolate side of town. That's me and that's you.
But it also, yes.
Love of black people comes in a lot of different forms, but it doesn't stay there. We love folk as a whole, but we start there with our mamas. And today, my mama's birthday, brother, 88 years young.
All right. Happy birthday, Mama West.
I'm telling you, but see, she set a standard. You see what I mean?
There you go.
And I'll never be the person she is, but I'll tell you one thing, I'm never going to give up trying to be and aspiring to be her level of spiritual excellence and the level of moral excellence in that regard.
It also requires for black people to have to be willing to fund our own stuff.
That's true.
The reason that's vital is because I sort of lay out, you can't keep saying, man, we want y'all to fight, but then you expect us to have somebody else pay for it. I've said it, and this is not denigrating the NAACP, but the reality is this here. If the NAACP's budget is based upon corporate giving, then the NAACP cannot truly be hardcore on fighting for black folks against the very interest. The Color of Change doesn't accept any corporate gifts. And what I tell folk all the time, the reason the Chicago Defender was as powerful as it was because black folks had subscriptions. They paid for it. And so it's getting our people to understand, like this here, I do it all the time. I tell people, I say, y'all, if 20,000, I got 2.7 million social media followers. If 20,000 of our people gave $50 each, and that's the Wall Street Journal costs $350 a year. I say if 20,000 gave $50 each, that's $4.19 a month, 13 cents a day. That completely funds the show. We can travel, we can cover stuff. We will do 700 hours of content this year. I said, but we've got to be willing to fund it. Now we've got about 8,800, 9,000 folks. We got 11,000 to go. But the point I'm trying to make is you can't keep expecting somebody else to fund your freedom fighters to fight for your freedom, because whoever's funding your freedom fighters is really who they responsive to.
No, I tell you, those strings are real. Those strings are very, very real. You are absolutely right, my brother. Absolutely right. And that means that we have to have a black business class that puts struggle for justice more at the center than just a matter of making money and living large. Now, we're not denying, they can live well.
Right.
But when you're in struggle, you got to be able to make some sacrifices here. And you got to be able to provide support for folk who are fighting for your cousins, because all your cousins not doing as well as you are. And they are just as precious as you are. And many of your cousins catching hell, and tied that all of us got, loved ones dealing with mass incarceration and all of this mass unemployment and the inadequate education and housing. And they are just as priceless as anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and that's why I don't have it, but it actually is upstairs. Martin Depp's book on Operation Breadbasket. One of the most underappreciated things that MLK left us, that Reverend Jackson picked up, and they used the power of boycotts and the power of the church to increase the wealth of black folks when it came to jobs, putting money in black banks, when it came to black businesses, also supporting them. John Rogers lives in that tradition where I lived in Chicago 6 years, where I saw John Rogers at Rainbow Push every Saturday with his check, because he said we can't ask our civil rights leaders to fight for us and then expect them to starve, because ain't no 401k plan in the civil rights movement. And I think just for too many of us, is I think that a lot of black folks, I just keep saying, you can't sit back and say, man, what y'all gonna do if you're unwilling to also make sure the black church, the reason it was so powerful, because the black folk funded the pastor.
They had independence and autonomy when the pastor was courageous enough.
Right.
Pastors can sell out too, like in Detroit, they sell out to Henry Ford. The Reverend C.O. Franklin refused to. Charles Leander Hill of Hartman Memorial refused to. Charles Adams refused to, but you are absolutely right. And John Rogers is a good example. I break bread with him every year. He's tied to Brother Father Flager, right there, to St. Sabina. He gives to St. Sabina, just like he gives to Brother Jesse, you see. But he's very much part of the black upper class, really. He got some serious cash at Ariel, but he's never forgotten from whence he comes, and he provides certain kinds of financial support to forces for good, like Brother Flager and like Rainbow Coalition, a host of other organizations that he and
last question for you. Last question for you. 50 years from now, a kid is stumbling through books and they come across a Cornel West book. They're perusing YouTube and they come across a video, an interview, this interview, a speech, a lecture. And they're like, who is this? What do you want that kid to know who Cornel West was?
Wow, that's a powerful question, though, brother. I would say this, that if they had any sense of what I tried to do in my own fallible and feeble way, that I would provide them as a vehicle to what it is to be part of a great people, of a great tradition, who've been hated chronically for 400 years and kept dishing out love warriors, who were terrorized for 400 years but still was free, who was traumatized for 400 years but still had a style and a smile. And so they would then connect me to Ma Rainey's, the Bessie Smiths, the John Coltrane's, the Curtis Mayfield, the Dramatics and the Delphonics and the Emotions, and all of those of that tradition in the face of overwhelming catastrophe that said, here comes some more compassion, here comes some more courage, here comes some more creativity. Listen to Mary Lou Williams on the piano and you understand what West was trying to do. Be a part of that tradition, not looking for popularity now. No, not at all. Looking for integrity, putting a smile on his mama's face and his daddy's and grandma and granddad, because that's where I come from. That's who I am. So I would hope they wouldn't focus on me. They would see through me this great tradition. And I do believe, though, brother, it is the greatest tradition in the modern world. There's been no other people who have been both hated and terrorized and traumatized the way black people have, and yet keep dishing out love warriors. Now, how long that tradition gonna last? We don't know. We don't know. We may reach a point where the black community say, you know what? We just need to create a black version of the Ku Klux Klan. They terrorized us, we terrorized them. Our tradition says we were looking for something deeper. But we might run out of gas. And they'll say, well, Brother West was one of those old Neanderthals. He was part of those old love warriors. Hey, that's true. That's true. We don't know what the future people bring, you see. But a little small slice in my shipwreckage life make access to that great tradition. So if they end up listening to John Coltrane, Love Supreme, they understand what I was talking about. Oh, yeah. They listen to a little Aretha. They understand what West was talking about in his text, in his interactions, in his movements, in his style, in his smile. That's where I come from.
My booking producer Jackie Clark hit me. She said, Dr. West called me twice already. Want to make sure we doing this interview tonight. I said, let him know we good. We gonna do it a whole hour. She said he's excited. He wanted to make sure I said we on.
No, see, when you called through her, I said, Brother Roland, I'm stopping everything. People don't understand what we got together. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
We don't have to agree on everything, but we brothers. So I stop everything. But then I called in. She's been magnificent. And I called and I said, I just want to make sure. I ain't missing this. On Mama's birthday, I ain't missing this. This is Brother Roland right here.
Well, they also don't know that you and I have closed many parties together. The last one on the dance floor. So just so folks don't get confused with it.
Ooh, you ain't like a little midnight star. What you talking about? But I love you, brother, and I respect you.
Love you well, my brother. Dr. Cornel West, it's always a pleasure. Our folks, they have absolutely enjoyed this. They're going to enjoy the restream as well. We appreciate it. Keep swinging. And in the words of our frat brother, Vertner Woods and Tandy, and I end many of my speeches this way, we will fight until hell freezes over, and then we will fight on the ice.
Oh, Lord have mercy. I never heard that formulation.
Yes.
I know being faithful unto death of Gardner Taylor, Emmanuel Scott, and Carolyn Knight, but on the ice, brother.
Vertner Woods and Tandy said we will fight until hell freezes over, and then we will fight on the ice.
On the ice, that's the tradition we come from, brother. Go down swinging like Muhammad Ali and Ella Fitzgerald. Don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing and the stang in the swing. Keep that stang in the swing.
Yes, sir.
You have a smile on your face, though. You know what I mean?
Indeed.
You gotta find joy. You gotta find the joy. See, black folk, we've been a people of joy. We're soulful people, and that's what soul is. That sharing of the soothing sweetness and joy in the face of all the ugliness. That's what's kept us going. That's part of what that 858 stands for, brother. That joy, that service, that willingness to go down swinging, though, man. But I salute you, man. I really do.
Likewise. We salute you as well. Dr. West, thanks a lot. You take care.
Take good care. God bless you now.
All right, thank you, sir. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. My next guest, he's written a number of books on a variety of these subjects, and I'm just going to name some of the books. Gerald Horne is the author of The Counterrevolution of 1776, Slave Resistance, and the Origins of the United States. In addition, that's just one of his books. In addition, he's the author of White Supremacy Confronted, U.S. Imperialism and Anti-Communism versus the Liberation of Southern Africa, from Rhodes to Mandela. He also is the author of The Rise and Fall of the Associated Negro Press, Claude Barnett's Pan-African News, and the Jim Crow Paradox. Another one of his books is The Dawning of the Apocalypse, The Roots of Slavery, White Supremacy, Settler Colonialism, and Capitalism in the Long 16th Century, and his great book on jazz, folks. I think you'll love this one here. Jazz and Justice, Racism and the Political Economy of the Music. If I had to name all of your books, Gerald, I wouldn't have any time to do the interview. Glad to have you in Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's just first of all, I will, before we even get into the books, just want to get your assessment of this state of this campaign. Democratic convention took place this week. Just want to get your overall thoughts as a historian, as a political science professor, as somebody who studies and lives this stuff every day.
Well, I have a mixed opinion. Certainly, I agree with the consensus coming out of the convention that Donald J. Trump must be defeated by all means necessary. But I think that there were mixed signals coming out of the convention that are disturbing. I mean, why is it that Republicans like John Kasich, the former governor of Ohio, got more time than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the party's rising stars? And I was also disturbed by the dearth of focus on foreign policy, particularly during a week that you had the government in Mali that was overthrown in a coup, a direct result of the overthrow of the Libyan regime in 2011, when the weapons in Libya leaked into northern Mali, creating a religious insurgency that has now captured 2/3 of the country. The problem for the Democrats is they oftentimes set foreign policy aside, but the Republicans don't, and then the Democrats get pushed into these wars that gobble up our tax dollars, leaving little to spend on education and healthcare, purportedly the major Democratic priorities.
Well, one of the things, and when you talk about that, when you talk about foreign policy, on the night that was supposed to be National Security Night, I saw this one tweet from Paul Rykoff of IAVA. He said that it really wasn't much attention paid to that. He said, as opposed to, of course, General Colin Powell, he spoke that night. But look, Democrats also are in a position where Republicans, I said this last night on the show, Republicans can be far right or far right. Democrats have all these competing constituencies within the party. And so they're trying to sit here and again, play music to meet all those constituencies, as opposed to what you're going to see next week. It's going to be pretty white next week. Like I said, it's going to be pretty white. It's going to be pretty right and far right. And Democrats constantly are having to deal with this issue. Who are you appealing to? Who is the real base of the Democratic Party?
Well, that is the $64 question, is it not? And part of the problem that your intelligent comment tends to suggest is that what unites the Republican Party base, even though they don't like to admit it publicly, 63 million strong, is that they're involved in a counter-revolution against the changes of the 1960s. They would like to see an overthrow, fundamentally, of this movement's fruits of victory against Jim Crow. That is to say, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which Chief Justice John Roberts has more or less sworn to gut, which he did in 2013 with the Shelby County case. And I think that that helps to unite the base of the party, but what makes it difficult to attack is that they don't necessarily admit that publicly, although we all know what the real deal is.
Well, and you're absolutely right, because, I mean, look, a lot of people, it was really the Barry Goldwater book that changed the mind of many conservatives. And he really, of course, he opposed the 64 Civil Rights Act. There were a number of people, William Buckley, okay, this Republican intellectual, National Review, they completely reversed their views on civil rights as a result of that. And so when you look at what has happened, the Fairless Society, the attack on civil rights, the attack on feminism, when it comes to the environment, that's what you have. Just today, Donald Trump gave a speech where he just touted, hey, if I win, I could potentially appoint 5 Supreme Court justices. He was just touting that. And I think Senator Chuck Schumer was one of the few Democrats all week who brought up the Supreme Court. I have been yelling and screaming on this show for the longest that, look, they want to put on 35 to 45-year-old, mostly white men and white women to be federal judges so they can control the federal judiciary for the next 40 to 50 years. So it doesn't matter how diverse Congress looks. It doesn't matter that the Black Caucus will likely have 60 members come January. It doesn't matter how many Latinos get elected. If they can control the courts, they control the country.
Well, fortunately, what is now being bruited in certain circles within the Democratic Party is the idea that can be accomplished legislatively of expanding the number of justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. Right now, it's been 9. It's been 9 for a number of decades, but that is not constitutionally mandated. And if the Democrats follow through with the other suggestion of getting rid of the filibuster, which basically means that you don't need a 51 to 49 majority in order to pass legislation, With the filibuster, you basically need a 60-40 majority in order to pass legislation. I think those two maneuvers, if those can be executed early on, assuming that there is a President Biden sworn in January 2021, that could go a long way to pushing back this conservatism into the subordinate position where they so rightfully deserve to be placed.
You talked about, in his speech, Joe Biden talked about Charlottesville. He mentioned that. And one of your books, first I'm gonna merge two. The Counterrevolution of 1776, Slave Resistance and the Origins of the United States of America, this particular book right here. And the other one, White Supremacy Confronted, U.S. Imperialism and Anti-Communism versus the Liberation of South Africa from Rhodes to Mandela. It's amazing when you hear people, they talk and they're like, well, you know, you guys keep bringing up systemic racism. In fact, today, I guess in his speech, you know, Trump said 1619. I never heard of 1619. I only heard of 1492, just simply showing his pure ignorance. That's what we're really dealing with here, Gerald. We're dealing with Americans who are just like Trump, who are wholly ignorant of this nation's history, who they sort of have this one view that has been taught what I call his story as opposed to history, and what folks are now having to confront with Black Lives Matter, what's happening in the streets. They're having to confront not just black folks talking about white supremacy, but this new generation of white folks who are like, damn, y'all black folks been right. There is white supremacy, and what we must do to deal with that. That's a part of American history embedded in every fabric of American society.
Well, I'm afraid to say that the situation is even worse than your perceptive comment tends to suggest. I'm sure you're following the controversy involving QAnon, this harebrained conspiracy theory that suggests that Donald Trump single-handedly is confronting the deep state and other elites, including the Democratic Party, who are involved in pedophilia, who are involved in all manner of ridiculous ideas. And they're sending members of Congress, presumably, to Washington in a few months, and Mr. Trump refuses to condemn them because I think he realizes that he needs every vote that he can get. But he's embarking on a very dangerous path when you let these extremists into the mainstream. Now, you note that a few moments ago, I mentioned that there was a counter-revolution unfolding against the changes of the 1960s. And I chose that term intentionally because, as the title of my book that you just raised in your hand suggests, there was a counter-revolution that led to the formation of the United States in the first instance. As I detail painstakingly in that book, The Counter-Revolution of 1776, in the run-up to George Washington and his comrades seceding from the British Empire, London, for various reasons, was moving towards the abolition of slavery. If they had allowed, that is to say, if the settlers led by George Washington had allowed that particular decision to leapfrog the Atlantic, it would have jeopardized the major source of their wealth. We're talking about major slave owners when we talk about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison et al. And then there was the idea that London was getting tired of expending blood and treasure, waging war against Native Americans, and then turning the land over to real estate speculators like George Washington, who may have been the biggest landowner in North America. And as a result of this revulsion against London's policies towards land and labor, the so-called patriots decided to break the law and engage in a bloody armed revolt against the British Empire, establishing the United States of America. And thus, in 2020, it's no surprise that protesters on the streets of Portland, Oregon, have raised the relatively new slogan with regard to stolen people on stolen land. We are the stolen people, stolen from Africa to work for free for decades and centuries on the land stolen from the Native Americans. And fortunately, this kind of perceptive analysis has not arrived a moment too soon.
Well, and part of the issue also is that when you look at the folks who are sitting on these cable networks, frankly, many of them, especially a lot of these hosts, not well read. Not understanding how to sort of bring these things all together. When I think about the book, The Color of Law, when you talk about really where we stand with housing in this country, which goes directly into the issue of wealth, things along those lines. And when we talk about again, colonialism and white supremacy. You mentioned Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She specifically used that word in the 60 seconds she had when she nominated Senator Bernie Sanders. You have a former Department of Homeland Security official who has said that Donald Trump wanted to trade Puerto Rico for, I think, Greenland or something along those lines. Then when you see him calling African nations shithole countries, sitting here limiting people who are here, sending them back, whether they are going back to Liberia, whether they're going back to Haiti, going back to all these countries, what you have is an administration who sees themselves as the last line of defense to maintain whiteness, and that's what Stephen Miller is about. That's who Donald Trump is appealing to. Vice President Pence gave an interview on CNN where he was like, I don't know, y'all chasing these shining objects, I don't know who they are. And the anchor was like, so you don't even pay attention to the news? I mean, that's what you're dealing with. So I keep telling people, all these black people who also, who are like, well, man, why you keep saying Biden Harris? I'm like, y'all, I am not saying that Biden Harris are these perfect individuals, but we have a clearly defined white supremacist who is enacting white supremacist policies, and let's not pretend that's not the case.
Well, it's striking that you mentioned what you just did, because recall that when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were passed, it was President Lyndon Baines Johnson himself, a man with roots in segregationist Texas, who suggested that the Democratic Party, his party, would be losing the South for years to come and would be losing the white vote for years to come. And that is precisely what has transpired. That is to say that the last time the Democratic Party won a majority of the vote that basically is defined as white was before many in your audience were even born, believe it or not. And one of the ways we were able to countervail that particular advantage was our reliance upon and solidarity with our friends in this international community. Recall that it was just a few weeks ago at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, Switzerland, that the African Union, headquartered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, filed a motion calling for a commission of inquiry into what they term, quote, systemic racism, unquote, in the United States of America. This was in the wake of the lynching of George Floyd in Minneapolis on camera, May 25th, 2020. Now, the State Department played it cool, but beneath the surface and behind the scenes, they were lobbying furiously, issuing threats, twisting arms, and that resolution did not take flight. The tragedy of that entire episode is that I'm not even sure if leaders, even intellectuals in our community, were aware of what was being done on our behalf at the Human Rights Council of the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. I hope and I trust that another opportunity like the one in June 2020 will reemerge. And I hope and I trust that when it does reemerge, the Congressional Black Caucus and the NAACP will be on the case and will be able to put maximum pressure on Washington to get its act together with regard to taking aggressive steps to finally root out this pestilence known as systemic racism and white supremacy.
There are people who are watching who may have a surface understanding with the depths of white supremacy. One of the other books, Keenan, if you could go ahead and show that graphic, is The Dawning of the Apocalypse, The Roots of Slavery, White Supremacy, Settler Colonialism, and Capitalism in the Long 16th Century. And the reason that is so important, because Gerald, what bothers me is that when I get into these arguments with these ADOS folks, who many of them for me are anti-immigrant, when I listen to right now this whole battle, well, Kamala Harris's daddy is Jamaican, mom is Indian, and so she don't really understand our situation, even though she was born in Oakland, daddy left when she was 5, and you go through all that sort of stuff along those lines. I keep telling African Americans, stop acting as if we're so different. They just simply got dropped off at a different spot before they came here. And what you try to do in your books is get people to understand white supremacy is not, oh, white supremacy in Africa, white supremacy in South America, white supremacy in Latin America, white supremacy in the Caribbean, or white supremacy in North America. You lay out, no. That's a direct connection, connecting the dots of white supremacy worldwide.
Well, it's unfortunate that sort of discussion is taking place because it's not helping us move forward. I don't think that people realize that during the time when we were commodities, we were traded like commodities. You could be an Afro-Floridian one day, an Afro-Cuban the next day, and an Afro-Brazilian the very next day. I'm doing research now on your state of Texas. Mm-hmm. And after Juneteenth, June 19, 1865, despite that date notwithstanding, you had certain Texans who wanted slavery, in the words of Keith Sweat, to make it last forever. Mm-hmm. And so you had Black people smuggled out of Galveston, Texas, to be enslaved in Cuba after June 19th, 1865. Just like before June 19th, 1865, there was this massive slave trade between the slavery plantations of Cuba and the slavery plantations of Marshall, Texas, Tyler, Texas, Northeast Texas, Southeast Texas, etc. Likewise, after June 19th, 1865, you had slave owners who wanted to be continued slave owners who smuggled Africans out of Galveston as far as Brazil. And so to try to draw up these distinctions today between some who have roots in Jamaica, some who have roots in Florida, some who have roots in Texas, I think it mangles our history. It does violence to our history. It doesn't do justice to our history. It disrupts Black solidarity. It disrupts Pan-African solidarity. And it basically sets us back while we need to move forward.
Can you speak to that point you just made? Because in White Supremacy Confronted, and I think it's chapter 8. You in here you linked the fighting and the ending of apartheid to what was happening in Little Rock, and how folks there were fully aware of what was happening here. What was happening here, folks were fully aware there, and of course with Claude Burnett and the Associated Negro Press. I mean, you had this linkage here of folks understanding that they were fighting the same battle at the same time and were not these separate entities. And, oh, Africans, we can't stand y'all, African Americans, we can't stand y'all Africans. No, that wasn't the case.
That certainly was not the case. And I think sometimes our friends, and perhaps even our antagonists too, lose sight of the numbers. I mean, we all know we're in a hostile environment, and yet roughly we're 40 million people, but perhaps 13 to 15% of the population. So how do you move forward given that disadvantageous situation? Well, historically, the way we moved forward was to realize that we arrived in North America, as Jesse Jackson used to say, as a result of a foreign policy called the African slave trade. And we were able to escape from slavery, not least because of a foreign policy. First of all, the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, which disrupted the entire system of slavery, creating a general crisis, pressing London, the superpower of that era, to move away from that system because they were afraid they would lose their wealth in neighboring Jamaica, not to mention their lives as well. And then they moved towards abandoning slavery itself in the 1830s under encouragement and pressure from the Haitian revolutionaries, which is one of the reasons why we'll always be in the debt of Haiti forevermore. And then to fast forward to the 20th century, after World War II, you saw that the United States was in a competition with the former Soviet Union for hearts and minds, particularly in resource-rich Africa and the Caribbean. People of color, particularly people of African descent, had trouble believing that Washington was the paragon of human rights virtue as long as there was U.S. apartheid and U.S. Jim Crow. And that puts pressure on the United States to then put pressure on Britain, the colonial power, to move out of Ghana, West Africa, by 1957. And when Ghana comes to independence in 1957, as you're going through a desegregation process at Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, President Eisenhower, who quite frankly was no friend of Black people, was under tremendous international pressure to keep these Euro-Americans in Little Rock from massacring and mauling little children with the images broadcast on global television around the world. So he's forced to send troops into Little Rock Central High School to basically alleviate the pressure on those Black children seeking an education. The same thing happened in 1962 when there was an attempt to desegregate Ole Miss, University of Mississippi, with James Meredith. So the international situation forever has been our saving grace, and those who neglect that are basically neglecting the lessons of history.
And as you were talking, I thought about what you said a little bit earlier in terms of what these African nations wanted to do at the United Nations. And when I listen to these folk who trash the year of return, what are they doing for us? Why are we spending money in Ghana, in Senegal, in South Africa? What I keep arguing is, as opposed to sitting here hating on those nations, you form alliances that allow for the creation of opportunities there and here, because I've always said this about Latinos/Hispanics, that people keep overlooking. What they have that we don't is they have a foreign policy component, meaning you come here and you're Bolivian American, you are Peruvian, you are from Mexico, you are from Dominican Republic. I know people might say, oh, territory, but folks, just follow what I'm trying to get to. There's a relationship. So even though Dominican Republic, even though Puerto Rico, yes, folks say, oh, no, hold up, I'm Dominican, I'm Puerto Rico. There still is more of there's a different connection there than, frankly, if you're African American from Alabama or from Mississippi. And so having that foreign policy component is helpful when you start talking about these issues that are happening in this country.
Well, obviously you hit the nail right on the head. And what it reminds me of is what we lost after South Africa came to independence in 1994. Because I'm old enough, you're old enough to recall the anti-apartheid movement of the 1980s and the 1990s. We oftentimes associate that with Trans-Africa and Randall Robinson, now residing, by the way, in the Caribbean. But actually, the anti-apartheid movement was much larger than Trans-Africa. There were many local committees, many local organizations as well.
Actually, before Trans-Africa, the Polaroid Revolutionary Workers.
Exactly.
In fact, when I interviewed the late Ron Dellums, I interviewed him. He told me when Nelson Mandela died, I had him on the show. It was the Polaroid Revolutionary Workers, Ken Williams and Carolyn Hunter, who later married Ken, who they were the ones who brought the issue of divestment to the CBC. Dellums said they told us about it. So we always talk about Dellums and Conyers. Those two brought it to the Congressional Black Caucus.
Well, absolutely. And even before the Polaroid Workers, bless their hearts, there was the Council on African Affairs engineered by Paul Robeson, the tallest tree in our forest, the late great actor, singer, linguist et al., who formed the Council on African Affairs in 1937, which crusaded into the mid-1950s when it was driven out of business. And so, driven out of business by the U.S. government, by the way, I should add. And so when South Africa came to independence, I think there was a sort of a sigh of relief, a sigh of exhaustion. It was felt that, okay, our job is done. You saw a lot of those organizations be rolled up. The ties were not necessarily maintained with our friends and comrades in Southern Africa. And now we are bereft to a certain degree, being ruled over by this white supremacist, Agent Orange, the oaf in the Oval Office, who's about to embark on this equivalent of a Klan Clavern next week, taking place virtually online. And the fact that as of today, we cannot say with assurance that he will be defeated on the first Tuesday in November should be chilling and alarming to us all. But it's not too late to try to restore those sorts of global connections. And by the way, they're not only political connections. I think that our folks in the business community should recognize that they too have a stake in this situation. I know that you have before you the book I wrote on the Associated Negro Press, led by Claude Barnett,
Yep.
who of course was an entrepreneur. He was a business person. He was trying to make money. But in terms of disseminating the news, he decided that the better part of wisdom was not only to cover Black communities in the United States, but to cover Black communities in the Caribbean, to cover Black communities in Africa, et cetera. And he did good and did well, because by doing good, he was able to make connections for himself that proved to be personally profitable. And in fact, he saw his news enterprise as something of a loss leader. It was a way for him to gain interest into the halls of power, into the corridors of power, to gain admittance to meetings with the late, great Kwame Nkrumah, the founding father of independent Ghana, for example, in 1957. So whatever segment of our community that we're discussing, we all have a stake in reviving and resuscitating these global connections that have been to our benefit over the decades and centuries.
Man, we could literally spend 5 hours going over these books, and I got a couple more questions. And again, folks, we're talking to Dr. Gerald Horne, professor there at University of Houston, in my hometown. And at the end of the interview, I'm gonna show you all 5 books, y'all. First of all, he's written 30, but I'm gonna show you the 5 that I have in front of me. Gerald, as I'm looking at the comments on YouTube and Facebook, and people are going, "Oh my God, I didn't know any of these things." In the counter-revolution of 1776, what would you say is the one most important thing that you want folks watching, mostly Black folks, but I got whites and others who watch my show, and people across the world? What's the greatest takeaway, or the greatest take you want people to read this book and get from it?
Well, sometimes you write a book in order to write one sentence, but you can't publish a book that only has one sentence. And the one sentence that frames this entire book, and it also sheds light on the question that my students at the University of Houston in my course on Introduction to African American Studies often ask from the minute they walk into the classroom, which is, why is it that Black people have been treated so atrociously and horribly in the United States, when purportedly this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, with this sturdy democracy and a Bill of Rights and all the rest? And what I wrote in that book that you just raised, and what I tell my students, is that Black people, by several orders of magnitude, did not support their slave owners, so-called, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, who they thought correctly were trying to establish a new country so that they could make sure that slavery would be perpetuated forevermore, and so that they could oust Britain from the leadership of the African slave trade, one of the most profitable enterprises known to humankind. You invest $1 and get $1,700 back. There are those even today who would sell their firstborn for a 1,700% profit. The United States had become the leader of capturing Africans and bringing them to Cuba by the 1790s. taking over the leading market, speaking of Brazil, by the 1840s. And since Black Americans opposed that entire process, when you fight a war and lose, which is what our ancestors did, you can expect to be penalized and pulverized forevermore unless and until you can turn the tables, which we began to do when we supported the Haitian Revolution, when we began to do, to fast forward to the 20th century, when we were in solidarity with Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana and Michael Manley in Jamaica and all of our friends all across the globe. So that is the main takeaway, that A, we have been beaten down so atrociously because we did not support the establishment of a slaveholders' republic in 1776, and B, one of the reasons why we were able to escape the noose that was around our neck was through international relationships, international solidarity.
What is that one takeaway that you want this audience to really get from white supremacy confronted?
It's an adjunct of what I just said, which is that there was an intimate connection between the movement against Jim Crow and the movement against apartheid. There were very close connections. When you had the Little Rock situation that I just described in Arkansas in 1957, you had solidarity protests in South Africa, even though they were under the gun, under apartheid mismanagement and misrule. And likewise, when you had solidarity on the part of Black Americans after the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa in the spring of 1961, when peaceful protesters were shot down in Sharpeville, South Africa. And so it was like one hand washing the other. We scratched their back, they scratched our back. International solidarity helped to rescue South Africans from apartheid. International solidarity helped to rescue Black Americans from Jim Crow.
And what you also touch on and deal with in your book, The Rise and Fall of the Associated Negro Press, that it was Hitler who was studying Jim Crow.
That's right.
And applying what America was doing to Black people to Jews in Germany.
Well, it's not only that. It's the fact that I regret having to say this, but in some ways, the Black community who read Associated Negro Press dispatches in the 1930s and the 1940s were better informed about domestic and global matters than people today who have access to the internet. Because people today who have access to the internet, they're not necessarily trying to follow what's going on in the world. They're looking at cat videos on YouTube or the latest scandal involving Kim Kardashian, et cetera. And so I think we really need to rethink that entire concept, because it's a shame and a sin that in a low-tech era, in an analog era, people may have been better informed than many of us today living in a digital era, when you can have access at your fingertips to events taking place all over the world. And I should also say, to complicate it even further, at a moment when billionaires like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are sending rockets into outer space with the idea, although they don't necessarily admit it, of escaping this trash planet and reestablishing themselves in another planet and leaving us here to fry, as you saw in Death Valley, California, where there was 130-degree temperature as of a few days ago, the highest temperature ever recorded on planet Earth, which is just a harbinger, I'm afraid to say, of things to come.
Mm-hmm. Folks, again, he's got a ton of books. But I want you to get these 5. If y'all need to, people always ask me about book club. If you just type in hashtag Roland's Book Club on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you'll see the books that I mentioned. First up, I want to mention is The Counterrevolution of 1776, Slave Resistance and the Origins of the United States of America. Trust me, if y'all heard all that Tea Party stuff in Boston, no. You really want to read this to get a real understanding. The second, Keenan, you should be showing these books. The second one is White Supremacy Confronted: U.S. Imperialism and Anti-Communism versus the Liberation of Southern Africa from Rhodes to Mandela. The next book is The Rise and Fall of the Associated Negro Press: Claude Barnett's Pan-African News and the Jim Crow Paradox. And then there's also let's see, did I skip one? Let's see here.
Dawning of the Apocalypse.
The Dawning of the Apocalypse, the roots of slavery, white supremacy, settler colonialism, and capitalism in the long 16th century. And we did not get to it, so we got to have you back to talk about jazz injustice, racism, and the political economy of the music, because trust me, not much has changed what you lay out there and then what's happening today when it comes to the music business. Dr. Gerald Horne, it was a pleasure. I certainly appreciate it. I hope folks got a whole lot of knowledge from this. And this is also why, I mean, the reality is this is the 21st century version of what Claude Barnett is trying to do, and Robert Abbott and others, us not waiting for somebody else to give us information. We've been able to put it out to the public for ourselves, for our audience to be able to consume it.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks a bunch, folks.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just 1 minute.
As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Folks, during this election season, you have seen a number of video clips and also memes and quotes of James Baldwin, someone who was very vocal about fighting for freedom for black folks in this country. In his latest New York Times bestseller, Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own, Princeton professor of African American Studies and MSNBC contributor Eddie Glaude Jr. looks at James Baldwin's life and work and relates it to the world we're living in right now. Eddie Glaude Jr., glad to have you on the show. Eddie, when we think about what Baldwin said, I often say when you look at King's book, Chaos or Community, where do we go from here, Chaos or Community, that you literally, if you just listen to what he says and writes and what King writes, you swear they're talking about 2020 and not 1965, 67, or 68.
Absolutely. Particularly Baldwin responding to the country's betrayal. When we talk about 63 and 64 and 65, March on Washington, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. But, 68, as you know, Roland, this is the election of Richard Nixon. By 72, re-election. What do you get? You get the hard hat rebellion. You get the so-called forgotten American, the silent majority. You get the debates around school busing, the violence in Boston and the like. So Jimmy lives long enough to see the country turn its back. And in some ways, Roland, after the assassination of Dr. King in April of 68, he collapses. He tries to commit suicide in 1969. So he has to try to figure out how to pick up the pieces. And this is why, 1972 in his important book, No Name in the Street, is so important to me, because it's a book that's really centered around trauma, wound, and trying to answer the question, now, how do we pick up the pieces and roll this damn boulder up the hill again?
We are engaged in a very vigorous battle here. We are seeing the results. I used the hashtag we tried to tell you in terms of what Donald Trump was going to be. I have seen a lot of the social media posts where folks have been blasting you, saying, look, you argued in 2016, you were on my TV One show, News One Now, for folks to leave the top of the ballot empty because with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And I've seen you respond to folks. So talk about that. Talk about what you wrote in your book in 2016 and what you're writing in your book now. And do you still believe that was a smart analysis in 2016, or was there a mistake because of what we now see?
Right. So what I wrote in 2016 in Democracy in Black was, look, the Democratic Party every 2-4 years, they come to us. They don't really present a detailed platform, at least in my view, and they kind of take us for granted, and they try to herd us to the polls like cattle chewing cud. And I was saying I thought we had an opportunity. I thought we had a window coming out of the Obama administration and the Republican Party nominating someone who was obviously not qualified. I thought we had a window to push the party left. So I said, look, if the Democratic Party doesn't come correctly, we should blank out, leave the presidential ballot blank and vote down ballot. Once they nominated Donald Trump and I began to see what they were doing, I co-authored a piece with the political theorist or political scientist Fred Harris out of Columbia in Time magazine saying, look, if you're in a battleground state, vote for Hillary Clinton. But if you're not, you can vote your conscience. And this is what this might look like come the convention time. Now, look, I did a couple of things wrong there. I overestimated white folks. That's the first thing. I never thought white folks would elect someone who was so clearly incompetent.
Really?
In this moment. That was a gross error.
I overestimate them. Because Eddie, here's the deal, though. I mean, look, you teach history. In all of American history, white success has always been followed by white backlash. I mean, we can go Reconstruction. We can go 92 years of Jim Crow. We can go. I mean, at each step, black success economically, lynching. We can talk about again what takes place. We can go 13 years of civil rights, black freedom movement. Then we go through desegregation, white backlash, black mayors in 1970s. All of a sudden, success. Boom, Reagan 1980, white backlash. Again, Obama gets elected. 8 years, black president, boom, white backlash. I mean, that's been the history of black folks in America.
Right. So I mean, I understood that, right? I understood that very clearly. What I was thinking, though, is that here's the Republican Party nominating someone. So I think the backlash was already, I don't like to use the language backlash. White supremacy was already rearing its head aggressively before they nominated Donald Trump. We got the vitriol of the Tea Party. We got voter ID laws and voter suppression running rampant throughout the country. We know this, right? But when they nominated someone, a reality television show, a TV actor, when they nominated someone so grossly unqualified, someone who was clearly unprepared, and in some ways, Roland, not in some ways, was too stupid to be the president of the United States, I thought we had an opening. So in Begin Again, what I do is I write I basically said I made a mistake. I made an egregious error. I should have known better. I should have known better on a number of different levels. But the main thing is Baldwin confronted something similar that I was confronting when Clinton was running in 2016. Baldwin, remember, most people think of Jimmy Carter as this extraordinary president for Black folk. But in the 1979 campaign and 1980 election, Black folk were lukewarm about Carter. He had basically turned his back on us. Some Black leaders actually said he had become he had betrayed Black people with his policies of austerity that impacted Black communities, particularly in cities. And so what you saw was a depressed voter turnout. And in some ways, the fact that Black folk didn't turn out led to Ronald Reagan being elected. But Baldwin writes a piece where he says, sometimes you don't have anybody to vote for. Sometimes you're only voting to buy yourself some time. And in Begin Again, I said I should have known, given that I'm a lifelong reader of Baldwin, I should have known that lesson. And I made a mistake, and I admit it.
One of my panel, I want y'all to get ready to ask questions of Eddie Glaude. Eddie, and folks, again, put the book up again. We're talking about Eddie Glaude's a new book, New York Times bestseller, book that brings James Baldwin in real life. Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own. One of the things that jumps out at me, and this is when I listen to people talk about this country, and people say, look, it is what it is, it's never going to change. Right. I remember reading interviewing Harry Belafonte, and one of the things he said to me was, he said, this is the reason I have stayed. He said, because essentially I am going to fight to make America be the country it says it's supposed to be. Baldwin confronted that very question. And Black folks have always been the ones to save the nation from itself. Black folks have been the ones to actually show America what democracy looks like, show America what compassion looks like, show America what forgiveness looks like. And so what do you say, though, reflecting through the prism of Baldwin, to young voters who say, I don't believe that my vote can make a difference, and so I'm going to march for change and fight for change, but I'm going to check out of the voting process, even though the marching I'm voting for is to get the politicians to change policy, but I'm going to check out of the very system that can elect folk who agree with me. It's like those two things are at war with each other.
Right. I think this is the important point. I think oftentimes when we hear that sort of argument, there is a judgment, and it's a substantive and reasoned judgment, I think, at times, that the political system is bankrupt, that it's not really delivering anything for Black and poor people, that we have politicians who we elect, who then turn around and become captured by the political process, that we are a captured electorate. I can go on and on and on. What we need to understand is that the vote is one of the most important tools in our political arsenal. It is not the only tool, though. So every 2-4 years, there are elections at the national level. Every year, more than likely, there's an election. Every other year, there's an election at the local and state level. And part of what we need to understand is that politics involves electoral processes, but it's not reducible to those processes. So if we're thinking about change systemically, we need to understand that voting is a part of it. But when we overburden voting, and what I mean by that is that when we think about wholesale change being reducible to the vote, then we set ourselves up for disappointment. Voting in a democracy, Roland, in my view, is actually the last thing we do. Prior to the election, we are engaged in the work of trying to build a society that we want to build, in trying to create the conditions to produce the sorts of people we want to elect and hold accountable. So we have to see voting. This is what I'm saying to young folks. We have to see voting within the overall strategy of our attempt to build a genuine, right, just democracy. But I understand why they're skeptical. But the skepticism shouldn't lead to a dismissal of the vote as such. It should lead to a dismissal of a certain frame of understanding the role and place of the vote, if that makes sense.
Do you also believe that we also have a massive, massive failure when it comes to civics? That part of this issue is that we have folks who have no clue. And should the solution be, look, the school system is not going to do it. You're at what I call the end of the education process. You have your primary, your secondary, elementary school, middle school, high school, then you have college. And so should black communities, black churches, black organizations be leading massive civic engagement workshops and discussions? And two, and there's no disrespect to MSNBC or CNN or Fox News or ABC, NBC, CBS, but they're not going to do it. I'm just being honest. Shouldn't we also be challenging and calling out black targeted and black owned media, saying, are y'all going to keep spending all of this damn time on sitcoms, reality shows, award shows, and entertainment and gossip and sports, and dedicate something to civics, to public affairs, so our folks are not only becoming aware of issues around an election? Your thoughts on that?
Yes, 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 and yes, and yes, and yes. I mean, I can only say yes so many times, right? So I think, whether it's Nkrumah's conscientization, whether it's political education or the like, it is certainly the case that, we need to understand more fully, I think, the complexities and nuances of the political process, of the pursuit of power in the name of justice, of, in some ways, the power of everyday ordinary people. And the example I have in my head, of course, is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and what they did at their height and how they entered into spaces, sharecroppers in Mississippi and the like, and created the conditions under which they could become the leaders that they were looking for, as Ms. Baker would put it, right? How they would then run for office, but understood that running for office can present the danger of demobilizing grassroots efforts. But all of this was bound up, in an idea of the power of everyday ordinary people. Freedom schools, in another instance, right? I think this is really important, Roland, because you hit it right on the head. The second point, I think, is really important in the sense that what we've witnessed is, in some ways, the contraction of public deliberative space. Black-owned media, I mean, it can't just be Twitter. It can't just be social media, right? We've reduced the kinds of spaces where there's serious conversations about us by us. And I think it's really important for us to continue to bring pressure to bear to create spaces for your show and others that are dedicated, not just simply to entertainment and the entertainment industry or sport, but really thinking seriously about the conditions, material and otherwise, of Black communities in a moment where we face extraordinary danger that's not just reducible to Donald Trump. So I think you're absolutely right on both accounts, Roland.
I want to go to my panel for questions. I'll first start with Teresa Lundy.
One, I can't wait to get your book. I've been excited about this conversation. So as a millennial, I'm always curious about what we can do to further the dialogue and civic engagement, and also imploring that our fellow friends and neighbors are also aware of how important our voice is, but more so important of our history.
Yeah, Well, thank you, Sister Teresa, for that. Look, millennials combined with Gen Zers and Gen Xers and Gen Yers, you guys actually outnumber baby boomers in terms of the impact on the body politic. I think it's well past time for this cohort to begin to influence and impact the direction of the country. I think there's a general consensus among your generation and younger that the country is broken. And you're reaching for languages, vocabularies, ways of thinking that offer a different direction for how we might imagine being together as a country. Jimmy insisted that we work for a new Jerusalem. And I think it is well past time for millennials to assert their power in the public domain. And that's going to happen, not just simply in terms of election cycle, but it's happening in the streets, it's happening in the suites, it's happening in terms of your consumer power across the board. And so you got to start exercising and exerting your influence and power at this moment, right now, in this moment, right here.
Next question, Cleo Monago.
Greetings, brothers. Good to meet you.
Greetings, brother.
I have an analysis that I would like to get your perspective on, but I want to also just preface it with the fact that the myth of white supremacy on a systemic basis is perpetually moving the pole and working towards staying in power and doesn't have just one strategy. They have many, many strategies. And it's my perspective that we have not been equally strategic as a people so we could actually win going in the future. However, obviously you are going into the past when you write about Jimmy, because Jimmy is a person who lived in the past, and I guess you bring in him into contemporary life to bring the relevance of that. Earlier, I'm not sure if you were around when I was talking with Dr. Malveaux, and she talked about what women have gone through, and I want to get your analysis on this. It's my perspective that today's young men live in a different world. They don't live in a world that is as blatantly patriarchal and disrespectful of women in terms of the dismissal of them as the civil rights movement was. They live in another reality where there's all kinds of different gender this and gender that and women doing things. And the reality is not the same, and they're ahistorical. Is it your perspective from your experience with these young people that they are ahistorical? It's my perspective that they're ahistorical, so they don't relate to the framework that Dr. Malveaux is talking about in terms of, talking about black men now, in terms of how sexist black men were. They're looking at their current reality, which feels and looks different, and do not have a perspective of a harsh patriarchal past. What is your perspective of that? And the strategy issue.
Yeah, I would not describe these young folk as ahistorical. I think many of them are definitely trying to connect their particular movement with a tradition that constitutes the wind beneath their wings. I think that many of the young leaders of Black Lives Matter, for example, and remember, Black Lives Matter is a complex phenomenon. It's not just one thing. It's like Black Power. There were a number of different organizations that fell under the rubric of Black Power. Black Lives Matter is similar. There are a number of different organizations that fall under that label or that slogan, but it's a sentiment that cuts across all of the different political formations. But I think a lot of these young folk, especially young leaders, those who are part of this movement, understand that there has been a kind of patriarchal bias that have defined the model of Black leadership, that there's been a kind of hypermasculinity that has undermined the pursuit of justice, that these gender norms kind of constrain and lock us in. So even as they're inheriting the grandness of the tradition, they're bringing critique to bear, right? So when you read, this is not your grandma, this is not your mother's movement, sometimes that reveals a kind of ignorance, but other times it also reveals a kind of criticism, a way of distancing from a certain model of leadership that I think is really important. So, in Begin Again, I start chapter 1 with Jimmy in a meeting, with Baldwin in a meeting with SNCC students at Howard. And they were chopping it up until the sun came up. And Baldwin said to them at the end, he said, "What I ask you that you promise your elder brother that you don't believe what the world says about you. And I promise you that I will never betray you." And when Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, wrote his autobiography with Michael Thelwell, he said, Baldwin never betrayed them. My relationship to the young organizers and activists is that we need to support, we need to offer our encouragement. We need to be in solidarity with them and create the conditions under which, or help create the conditions under which, together with them, we can bring about a more just world. So they're challenging in the streets. Some of them are challenging politically as they organize, but I don't think they're ahistorical, if I understand your question, Doc. I don't think they're ahistorical, at least not all of them.
Julian Mavo.
Hey, Eddie, how you doing? It's good to see you.
Hey, Julie, good to see you.
I'm a big Baldwin fan. Love him, love him, love him. So I'm looking forward to seeing your book. And when you talk about him chopping it up all night, I don't have time to share the story about how I met him in a bar in New York. And we ended up getting put out the bar and sat on a park bench and continued the conversation because the brother really could talk. One of my favorite Baldwin things is the collection of essays, The Price of the Ticket. And the title essay, The Price of the Ticket, really talks about what white people give up in order to be white. In other words, that they give up their nationality, they give up, in order to be white, they have to shrug off their Irishness or their Italianness or all of those things. And I think that he had a profound understanding of whiteness in a way that many African-American people and scholars do not. And in that understanding of whiteness, I think that perhaps where some of his despair actually came from. Now, he wasn't consistently despair, but you get some despairing moments in some of his essays. So my question to you, in terms of that particular essay and others, which would your top 3 Baldwin essays be that you would suggest every young person and not so young person read?
Wow, that's a hard one. But let me just say this, Julian, you're absolutely right, Dr. Malvo, right? So at the heart of Baldwin's corpus is what I call this revolutionary inversion. And that is, he's going to insist that the problem ain't us. The problem ain't Black people, right? To put it in my Mississippi way, right? And that is to say, he says, I never thought of myself as the N-word. You called me the N-word. And the question you need to figure out is, why did you need the N-word in the first place?
Come on.
So then he says, I'm going to give the N-word back to you. And then ask the question, who's really the N-word, baby? Right? So Baldwin flips it. That's really key. So the problem ain't us. It's this conception of whiteness that's rooted in this belief that because one is white, one ought to be valued more than others. And until we uproot that, we're going to find ourselves on this racial hamster wheel over and over and over again. So the 2 or 3 essays that I would suggest, of course, Fire Next Time is really important. White Man's Guilt, 1965 Ebony piece, is critical for his understanding of history. But let's just put Fire Next Time aside. So I would go White Man's Guilt. As Much Truth as One Could Bear is a wonderful essay written in 1962. And then I would say read To Crush a Serpent, which was the last essay published in Playboy magazine, where Baldwin goes at the evangelical right, the moral majority, and offers a vision of salvation and love that is so profound that it's an extraordinary sermon that I think suggests what he was thinking about as the cancer was ravaging his body. So I would say, again, As Much Truth as One Could Bear, White Man's Guilt, and To Crush a Serpent. But ask me tomorrow, I might give you 3 different ones.
I can't read your book.
Eddie, last question for you.
Sure.
And that is, I want to get your perspective on, everybody's been weighing in on my interview with Ice Cube, talking about his contract with Black America, having a conversation with the Trump folks as well. Want to get your thoughts on that. And there are those who say we should not be criticizing him. There are others who say he was wrong as well. I'm of the opinion, first of all, no one is beyond criticism. I've gotten criticized from different people as well. The moment you choose to step into the political arena, you're going to make yourself susceptible to criticism. Just your thoughts on what you've heard and all these different things around that issue.
Roland, at the heart of it is a problematic conception of leadership. Du Bois worried about it in Souls of Black Folk. He says, when leadership is chosen from outside of our community, right? It undermines the very democratic process. He was referring to Booker T. Washington in that extraordinary essay of Mr. Booker T. Washington and others. And so part of what we need to kind of interrogate here, whether you agree with Ice Cube or not, is what is his conception of Black leadership? How is he thinking about his relationship to everyday ordinary folk? What authorizes his voice? Who gives him the power to speak on behalf of X, Y, and Z? And so I think it's really important as we kind of step into this next phase of Black politics, of Black life in this country, that we really give voice to, and Roland, this echoes something we talked about earlier in this segment, we really give voice to a more robust conception of Black deliberative space, where we are actually engaged in vibrant debate about what is best for, Black communities across the country, understanding that folks are going to come at it from different directions. So what bothers me is the hubris evident in the action, right? As if Black folk are just some homogeneous blob that anybody can just step forward and represent. What is Ice Cube's, who is Ice Cube's constituency? Who holds him to account? Who is he responsible to? Right? It goes beyond just simply having a love for Black folk, right? It has it is tied up or bound up with who is one accountable, who are you accountable to and responsible for?
Folks, the book, please show it again, by Eddie Glaude Jr. The book is Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. The final question I ask is of every book author. I can't believe I forgot about it. Every book author has a wow moment. A wow moment when they're researching a book, when they're writing it, when they're going through things. What was your wow moment when you were writing this where you just went, oh my goodness, wow, that's crazy? What was it?
Oh, wow, there's so many. There was one. I'm in the Schomburg. I'm in the Schomburg going through Jimmy's papers, right? And there's this. You remember those little memo pads, Roland?
Yep.
And Julianne, where you could write they're about this big, and you could write on them.
Yep.
I come across a little memo where Baldwin, scribbled a note to Robert F. Kennedy after his brother was assassinated, and it's a note on behalf of Harry Belafonte, Lorraine Hansberry, Jerome Smith, all the folks who met with Bobby Kennedy in '63, earlier that year, right? And Baldwin is saying to him, let me grieve with you. Let us grieve with you. We know what the suffering is. That's what we were trying to get you to see. And it's consistent with Jimmy's notion that suffering is the bridge. And I remember reading that in the file and just going, oh my God, this is something else. And it sent me back to, the artist's struggle for integrity. It sent me back to a whole range of essays, but it was one of the many wow moments I had, working my way through over 7,000 pages of work.
All right, Eddie Glaude Jr. I appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Doc. Take care of yourself and stay safe.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
All right, the folks at Seek.com, Black-owned company founded by Mary Spio. They, of course, a virtual reality company. You can check out their content at Seek.com, CEEK.com. You can do so, of course, with these VR headsets. You can look at it, of course, on your regular device or your pad or your computer. But if you want to experience being in the room, you can use this headset right here. All you simply do is just pop in your cell phone in here, pop it on, and then put this headset on, and you can literally experience their content in virtual reality. And so allows for you to do a 360-degree view of the room. But also, folks, they have the 360-degree 4D headphones right here. These are Bluetooth headphones. They have complete surround sound in terms of as you hear the particular music. Gamers love them as well when they're playing their games. And so it's just phenomenal bass in these headphones as well. You can get one or both devices at Seek.com using this promo code RMVR VIP 2020, RMVIP 2020. So we certainly thank the folks at Seek.com for being a partner with us here at Roland Martin Unfiltered. All right.